seat. Counsel, you may cross-examine.
Dr. Stein, when you became involved with this case, did you end up interviewing Ms. Schenecker?
Yes.
How many times did you interview her?
4 times.
And during the times when you interviewed her, how long would those interviews last?
I'd have to look at the specific notes, but anywhere from 2.5 to 3 hours.
Okay. And when you would speak to Ms. Schenecker and conduct the interviews, were there times when she would go off on tangents?
Yes.
Okay. And was that consistent throughout your interviews with her?
Fairly consistent, yes.
Okay.
She was worse sometimes than others.
And as you would visit her for your interviews, did you observe times when her mood would be okay and times when her mood would not be well?
Yes, there was some variability in her mood at times.
And Ms. Schenecker, in fact, at one point asked you if you could treat her, be her treating psychiatrist.
You know, I don't remember that, but if she did, I accept that as true. I don't recall that.
Okay. And when you were there, you advised her who you were working for at that time, that you were hired by the state attorney's office?
Yes, each time I saw her, I gave her the same instructions.
When you ultimately rendered your diagnosis of Ms. Schenecker, you opine that she has, what your diagnosis is bipolar 1 disorder as her Axis 1 diagnosis?
One of her Axis 1 diagnoses.
Okay.
Diagnoses.
And do you have an opinion about whether that's with psychotic features or without psychotic features?
Well, it would depend on when you're asking, what time period. I mean, there was no evidence that she had psychotic features at all, I would say at least a year before the alleged crimes. There are some, I believe when Dr. Gabriel White took over at USF, he might have diagnosed schizoaffective disorder bipolar type or bipolar disorder with psychotic features based on some paranoid kind of thinking. Not bizarre paranoid, but just some paranoia.
The psychotic features, is that evidence of a thought disorder along with the mood disorder being bipolar?
Yes.
Okay. And when you reviewed the USF records, that was something that you said you heavily relied on?
Yes, of course I took everything into consideration, but for certain opinions or aspects of my opinions, I found them to be particularly important.
And you mentioned Dr. Gabriel White. In fact, Dr. Gabriel White diagnosed Ms. Schenecker on August 16, 2009 with bipolar 1 disorder with psychotic features versus schizoaffective disorder bipolar type.
That's what I was referring to.
Okay. And that was a diagnosis that was constant throughout the time that Dr. White was treating Ms. Schenecker.
I'd have to look at the specific notes, whether that was something he documented each time. But I know that he did make that diagnosis, and there were some notations earlier on, before she even got to USF, where she had some suspiciousness, or she thought that maybe people were talking about her.
And there were notes from the records that at times that she was hearing things or things were happening with a television before.
Can you be more specific?
Sure. On March 28th, 2007, in that record, she had shared a psychotic experience of watching images on her TV set.
That would not be in the USF records.
But you reviewed all her records?
Yes.
Correct?
I'd like to look at that note because I don't have an independent recollection of that.
It's from March 28th, 2007.
Is that the Walter Reed Behavioral Medical Center?
I believe so.
Okay. I don't have it at my fingertips at the moment, but I will accept that because I do recall there were about 5 or 6 notations between 1998 or 99 and 2011, January 20th, where there were some symptoms reported that could be considered a psychotic symptom. They were very brief, very transient. So that might have been one of them.
And that was something that appeared from time to time in her records?
Yes, much less than the predominant mood disorder and the alcohol, in particular, those problems.
Not unusual for someone with bipolar 1 with psychotic features at times of a major mood episode to then sometimes experience those types of symptoms as well.
Sure.
Okay. And the psychotic features or the schizoaffective disorder that was the alternating diagnosis that Ms. Schenecker had from time to time, that would have a mood component as well as a thought component.
Well, I don't recall it being diagnosed from time to time. I do recall Dr. Gabriel White, when he started seeing her, I believe it was the summer of '09 until maybe the summer of '10, about a year, he had indicated the diagnosis, schizoaffective, bipolar versus the bipolar 1 with psychotic features, but I don't recall schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, being diagnosed at any other time except possibly back in 2001-2 when she was at NIH, but that actually wasn't their diagnosis. Their diagnosis was bipolar disorder 1.
And you would agree that at one point her diagnosis started off as depression and then progressed to bipolar 1?
Well, actually, the first time I saw that she was diagnosed was at National Institute of Health, and the initial admitting diagnosis was bipolar disorder not otherwise specified. She gave a history when she was seen there that she had a prior manic and depressive episodes for years, really since maybe about 1990. But as I said on direct, it's not unusual at all for people with bipolar to predominantly present as depressed, and that's why a lot of times it's not diagnosed right away. But in her case, the first diagnosis I saw was bipolar disorder not otherwise specified.
And she also had periods that you observed from the records of mania or hypomania?
Yes.
So the moods that she's experiencing are not only the depression, but also the other side of the spectrum being the mania or the hypomania.
Yes, it was more reported basically that she gave a history of having the periods of hypomania or mania. There were not many times it was actually documented as being observed. I do remember one, which was the National Institute of Health.
She had a manic episode.
That's correct. And that's why they ended up diagnosing her with bipolar disorder 1, but it was not with psychotic features.
And then as her illness has progressed, she's exhibited the other parts of the record that you indicated previously where she had some psychotic features.
Yeah, very minimal, very short-lived, yes.
but continuous throughout her treatment.
No, no. In fact, there have been very, very few times between the earliest documentation of 98, 1999, with the last mental health record, January 20th, 2011, where that was documented. I mean, there was in 2000, probably 2007, before she came down to Tampa, there might have been some concern about with psychotic features, but this is not someone who was presenting with psychotic features very often at all.
Do you recall her being presenting with psychotic features in March of 2007 when she stated that she needed to invent something in order to support herself?
I remember that notation. I did not necessarily conclude that that was a psychotic symptom because people who have bipolar disorder and are hypomanic at times or manic, they can be grandiose. They can think that that they're inventors or something like that. And there was something else about that note. I'm just going to take a look at it. It did not appear to me to be a psychotic process. I think it was because she was saying that she may have to, in order to make money and get an income, that she may have to invent something in order to earn a living. It did not sound to me, unless you can read it to me, it didn't sound like it was psychotic to me.
That the doctors indicated she showed anxious with some psychotic features. She reported having to invent something to earn money to support herself, feeling husband would abandon her. She didn't want to take medication because it would take her creativity and that could stop her from making her invention. They noted that that she was scattered and inconsistent, racing thoughts and feeling her brain was sick.
That's one of the notations that I indicated earlier, probably in the Behavioral Medical Center records, where some notation of psychotic symptoms have been noted throughout her history, except on very rare occasions.
She also had feelings of paranoia as far as her husband maybe following her or there being cameras in the room when she was having her session.
Yes, I believe that was in, correct me if I'm wrong, 2009 at USF, maybe with Dr. White, where she had had some feelings like that. Now, she had expressed concern that her husband might be following her to the casino because of her gambling, and I didn't necessarily view that as a psychotic belief. In fact, I think that could have been real, that if someone is spending thousands of dollars gambling, that their spouse may be very concerned and may follow them. But she did talk about thinking at one time that maybe there was a camera. Her husband might have had a camera in the room.
In her room, in the
Yes.
treatment room where she was.
She asked, is there a camera in this room? Yes.
And that's something that the doctors took note of.
Yes.
When you receive the records for Ms. Schenecker, have you treated before patients that are diagnosed with bipolar I disorder?
Have I, I'm sorry?
Have you treated patients before that have been diagnosed with bipolar I disorder?
Oh, yes.
And Ms. Schenecker's record of treatment, you would agree she's someone that has been getting treatment throughout the years?
Yes.
And she's someone that even when she's moving from location to location, she's still going to psychiatrists as well as therapists.
Yes.
And at times integrating her husband into that, and in times integrating later on in 2010 her children into that as well.
I recall her integrating her husband and her children at USF in late 2010. I don't recall that occurring earlier. Not to say that it didn't, but I don't recall that.
Were you able to review Parker Schenecker's deposition as well in your preparation for this case?
No, I was not provided that.
When she was seeking treatment, the continuity of care, explain to the jury how that affects a patient with a mental health diagnosis.
It's important to have continuity of care, particularly if someone has a serious mental illness. Bipolar I disorder is a serious mental illness. And the continuity of care is important because if they need to be on medication, which typically if you have bipolar I, you need to be on medication lifelong, then the continuity is important to monitor the medicine, to see if it's working, if it needs to be increased or another medicine needs to be added, as well as therapy. I mean, sometimes there are issues that need to be addressed in therapy, not just medication, with people with bipolar I disorder.
And Ms. Schenecker was someone who was not only prescribed medication but also going to therapy.
Yes, at times she did engage in therapy, yes.
Okay. And that was something that you saw throughout her records that you were provided?
My recollection is that she predominantly was involved in medication management as opposed to a lot of psychotherapy, but she did have other periods where she received counseling or therapy.
And she has extensive records of going to therapy at USF when she was moved here in Tampa.
Yes, she started there, I believe, September 13th of 2007, and she continued all the way till January 20th of 2011.
Was Ms. Schenecker's condition something that could be treated without medication?
In my opinion, no, definitely not.
You would agree that her bipolar disorder, either with or without psychotic features, in your opinion, her mental illness is a severe biological illness?
Yes.
And when she was going to treatment, there's indications through the records that she's trying to get better. She's trying to solve her bipolar disorder.
In most cases, yes. There's some notation at times when she might have been non-compliant with medication. There are other times where she was advised to get treatment for alcohol use, and she did not pursue that. But for the most part, in terms of her mental illness of bipolar disorder, in my opinion, she was very serious about getting well and struggling with not getting well.
And there's indications from the records that at times she talks about the side effects of the medication and maybe wants to do alternative treatments or homeopathic treatments.
Yes, I did see an entry about that.
And she expresses concern about not being able to keep a job because of rapid cycling.
Yes.
Explain to the jury what rapid cycling is.
Rapid cycling is having 4 or more cycles between mania or hypomania and a major depression a year. Some people can have 4. Some people can rapidly cycle in one day. So it depends on the individual, but anyone who rapidly cycles has a much more unstable mood state.
And when Ms. Schenecker goes to Winmore in her intake interview, she states, I have to get off these meds and alcohol.
Yes.
And although maybe initially she doesn't want to be there, at the end they indicate that she's developed some insight.
My reading of the notes are a little bit different. They indicate clearly that she really lacked motivation for treatment while she was there. And but at the end, obviously, they discharged her and they felt that there was some improvement, that it would be safe enough to let her go. But My reading of the records was that that was not a very successful treatment process, unfortunately.
When she was initially there, they indicated that she's disheveled, tearful, and suicidal.
Yes, among other things, yes.
And by the time they indicate a note on November 28th, 2010, they state that she has gained insight into issues affecting her treatment and her attitudes towards recovery.
Yes.
There are times in the records where she's indicating that relationships between her husband and her daughter are strained, and then times when they're better.
Well, I guess, which records are you talking about? Because
The
predominantly...
USF records predominantly.
Well, if you...
May we approach? Yeah.
I'm talking mostly about the USF records. Are there times indicated in the USF records where Ms. Schenecker is discussing her problems with her daughter?
Yes.
And are there times when she indicates, like after a vacation or after something happens, that things have been improved with her daughter?
I believe there's one note where she went on vacation to Fort Myers for perhaps 10 days or 12 days, I'm not sure. And that was the result of pretty much being told that she needed to take a break from each other. And she indicates to the mental health provider that things are better since she returned with Calyx. One note, I believe.
And there are times back in on June 30th, 2010, where it indicates that she's getting along better with her husband and her daughter.
You said July 10th, 2000?
June 30th, 2010.
Okay. Yes, that is in that particular note.
You would agree that relationships between mothers and daughters, teenage daughters, fluctuate?
They certainly can, whether it's a daughter or a son with a teenager.
That's not uncommon.
In general, I would not say it's uncommon.
Ms. Schenecker, as she is talking to her therapist and you were provided, she discusses a letter that she wrote to her daughter, Calyx.
Yes.
And that was something that you were provided?
Yes.
And during that letter, that was something where she was conveying to her daughter her illness because her daughter is starting to notice mood symptoms that she's having.
Yes.
And Ms. Schenecker describes her illness as being unrelenting.
I don't recall that word, but I would probably agree with that she had a persistent, unrelenting, serious mental illness that waxed and waned in terms of the severity throughout her life.
And she expresses to her daughter that she is sad or hurt that her daughter is seeing her in less than optimal conditions with her illness.
Are you referring to the letter she wrote?
Yes.
I don't recall all the content of the letter. I'd be happy to review it if you want me to, but
Sure.
it appeared to me, generally, it was a heartfelt letter trying to get her daughter to understand what she's going through.
And she talks about her daughter indicating that she can never thank her enough for coming into her life, and that she's proud of her, and that she brings her so much joy.
I do vaguely recall that there were some very positive comments that she made, yes.
And when she's talking about her illness, she says she does the best that she can do through the days. The days seem very long, and she gets exhausted easily, mentally and physically.
Again, I don't have it in front of me. If I am to accept your version, then yes. I did review it, but
Okay.
I
Do you
don't...
have that with your records?
I do not believe I have that with me, no.
Judge, if I can approach.
Okay.
Do you remember those statements being in the letter?
Yes.
And she talks to her daughter about how confusing and stressful it is for her to deal with her mother with this illness.
Yes.
And she's specifically talking about the fact that when Calyx talks to her, that she's not able to stay with a conversation because she's, as she terms, scatterbrained.
Yes.
And she's trying to express to her daughter that that's not because she doesn't want to pay attention to what she's telling her.
That's correct.
And she tells her, I love you dearly. I love your clever, brilliant, and creative mind. I hope that you will love and accept me with all my imperfections.
Yes.
And is that consistent with what you know about Ms. Schenecker from the records, that she wanted her family to understand her illness?
Very much, yes.
When the summer of 2010 comes around, do you note in the records that there's a start of physical symptoms for Ms. Schenecker, being the tardive dyskinesia?
Yes, I believe it was actually diagnosed in August of 2010, if I'm not mistaken.
And back on June 2nd, 2010, she stopped taking Abilify, and there's a note that her husband observed the movements and had written a letter to Dr. White that the movements had been embarrassing.
Yeah, actually that note, I believe it says that she stopped the Abilify 4 days earlier. But yes, that's the content essentially of that note.
And so she had stopped taking Abilify 4 days earlier. Her husband is indicating that she's having the movements and they're embarrassing. And there's also a note in that record that she's getting along better with her daughter.
I don't specifically recall that.
Do you have those records in front of you from June 2nd, 2010?
Yes. That's correct, I see that.
Now the lithium that she ends up being prescribed later on, how does that affect a person?
Well, lithium is a mood stabilizer, and if it is working correctly, it should level a person's mood out so that they do not have the hypomania or the mania, and they don't have really low moods consistent with a severe depression. It also is supposed to have some anti-suicidal effect. It's supposed to some degree, protect people from having thoughts of wanting to hurt themselves. So it's a mood stabilizer.
Does it lower someone's mood?
No, unless they, let's say if they are hypomanic and their mood is elevated, and they're put on lithium, it could have that effect where the hypomania starts to improve and therefore technically is lowering it to a more neutral state.
If someone is already in a depressed state and then starts taking lithium, will that depress their mood?
It should not.
When Ms. Schenecker is in the rehab treatment and then she gets out, by every indication based on the records and based on your conversations with her, your opinion is that she's in a severely depressed state?
Yes.
Okay. She's staying in bed?
Most of the time. I mean, there's clearly some evidence that she was, especially when, well, particularly when Mr. Schenecker left on the 19th, that she was taking her children to their sporting events. And we do know that she went to USF and saw Elizabeth Marsh on 120. She picked up medications at CVX on the 18th, the 19th, and the 20th. And we know, that she was functioning and getting out of bed, obviously to go to lock and load. But for the most part, she was in bed, very depressed.
And in December, she's in bed?
Yes.
Okay. And at that point, she's spending weeks in bed, and other than going to the doctor's appointments that we have notes for, she's remaining in bed.
Based on what she shared with me, that for the most part, she was in bed. Now, whether during that time in December, other than the doctor's appointment, she might have gone somewhere, I don't know. But what she represented to me, which would be consistent with my view of her having a very severe depression, is that she was, for the most part, staying in bed, isolating, and using oxycodone and alcohol at times.
She's also not getting out of bed based on Parker Schenecker's observations that are relayed to Dr. Obregon.
I believe there's an email where, and I don't recall the date, I can look it up, but he does indicate that maybe she's been in bed for the last 5 weeks or something like that. There is one particular email that I recall.
He also describes her as being low functioning.
Yes.
And although Ms. Schenecker is getting out of bed in January of 2011, according to the records and what your review is, you still believe at that point she's in a severe depressed state?
I do. I had an opportunity to read Elizabeth Marsh's deposition, who was her most recent therapist, who indicated on the 20th that she felt that Ms. Schenecker actually was doing quite a bit better. That might have been a very transient state, because when you take the evidence as a whole, in my opinion, this was an individual who was severely depressed, very low functioning, feeling desperate and hopeless, and quite unstable.
When you're talking about functioning, on January 20th, 2010, Elizabeth Marsh also indicates that patient is very shaky, especially at the beginning of the meeting. She calms by the end of the meeting, but patient has trouble walking, Parkinson-esque walking when she leaves.
Are you referring to 1/20/11? Because you
Yes.
said 1/20/10.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
1/20/11.
1/20/11, she does indicate that she observed that, correct?
And her mood is not good.
Correct. She had basically been telling just about everyone that her mood was not good. She was very depressed. I believe by 12/28 of 10, she told both her therapist and the psychiatrist, Dr. Obregon, it might have just been one of them, that she was feeling suicidal daily. She was very depressed.
And when you're talking about this email that Ms. Schenecker perceived as a divorce email or a potential divorce email, you were able to review that?
Yes.
Okay. And there's no indication in that email that Parker Schenecker is trying to divorce Julie Schenecker?
Correct.
Okay. This is an email that he is responding to the family members that are expressing concern over Ms. Schenecker?
Correct.
And in fact, when he's describing her illness that he's been dealing with for 20 years, he says that she's a 50-year-old with the judgment of a 10-year-old.
Correct.
And when Ms. Schenecker is not being shown this email by her family members or by Mr. Schenecker, she still indicates to Elizabeth Marsh on January 20th that that they would work things out if they got a divorce and settle financial issues and the issues with the kids.
Well, she not only said that to Ms. Marsh, she also said that elsewhere, but I disagree that she truly believed that, because in her journal, she indicated that she sensed that divorce was coming and she could not live alone. I think it was in her journal. And she had expressed concern with me that she was too weak and too ill to really be on her own. So yes, she did say that, but I don't believe she really believed that.
But that's what she's saying. In all instances that you're taking into consideration are all words that she's saying or things that she's writing.
Yes, but she also said other things, you know, in similar contexts and at times close in time to that, that led me to believe that she would not be comfortable. She was very concerned that Mr. Schenecker was going to put her out. And even her sister in the email to Mr. Schenecker said she was very concerned that Mrs. Schenecker would kill herself if Miss Schenecker loses Mr. Schenecker. So there are other people that knew her well who knew that this would really, really hurt her tremendously.
At the state that she was in January 2011, when they're already expressing concern for her.
Well, I would say particularly at that time, but I don't think, based on my evaluation of Ms. Schenecker and what she shared with me, that she ever felt that she could make it on her own. In fact, she said to me, she said that she wished that she could have, because it was a mistake for her to marry Mr. Schenecker. It was a very unsatisfying and unhappy marriage. And but she couldn't leave, and she couldn't make it on her own.
You would agree, though, that first of all, Mr. Schenecker indicated in his email that he was to Dr. Obregon, that he's broken the cycle and he's committed to maintaining his marriage.
I don't remember it that in those words.
And I paraphrase, I'll read it to you.
Can you give me the date on that particular email,
It's the
please?
first one of the emails, November 8th, 2010.
Is there a Bates number on that?
May I approach, Judge?
Yes.
Make it faster.
156.
1516? Okay. Let's see. I got it.
He's talking about being a son of a toxic parental relationship, and then he indicates, vowed that I'd break that cycle, and I think I've been successful.
That's what he says in that particular paragraph, as far as son of an alcoholic, son of toxic parental relationship, although parents were very supportive of my brother and me, vowed that I'd break the cycle and think I've been successful.
And you didn't have a chance to interview Parker Schenecker or review his deposition as to what he meant by that or what his commitment to the marriage was?
No, I did not.
In fact, you were able to review email communications that were provided?
Yes.
Okay. Were you aware of an email that Parker Schenecker sent his wife on January 19, 2011, talking about travel plans for April to go to a wedding together as a family?
That does not ring a bell. Can you give me the Bates number on that, please?
I'm sorry, it's covered. Yeah,
Yes.
No, it is covered. I don't recall seeing that. That doesn't mean I did not see it. There are a number of emails here, but I don't have an independent recollection of that one.
Okay. And you're aware from your conversations with Ms. Schenecker about the history of her marriage that the only two times that they separated from each other was her decision to stay back in Hawaii and her decision to leave Germany for a little while and go to Iowa because of problems in the marriage.
I believe that she indicated there were more times than that they had actually separated. I believe those two times that she had made that decision back then, yes.
In the time leading up to January 27th, 2011, it's your opinion that at that time Ms. Schenecker is severely mentally ill?
Yes,
And it's your opinion as well that she's in a deteriorated state?
yes,
And you would agree that she also at that point has the stressors, the psychological stressors going on?
if you're referring to the family stressors, then yes.
I'm referring to your report where you stated she had psychological stressors at the time.
I think I might have indicated those were the marriage and child-parent problems. Those were the major stressors, and as that got worse, she was drinking more, and her depression got worse.
In treating people with bipolar disorder, it's not unusual for those patients to have substance issues or either alcohol or narcotics.
No, it's not.
And at times, it's a form of self-medicating.
Yes,
Now, Ms. Schenecker at this time when she's drinking or then taking the pain pills, she talked to you about having physical pain that's associated with her mental illness. Brain pain.
she mentioned something about brain pain during the time I was evaluating her, yeah.
And that's not unusual for people that are suffering from depression to also have a component where there's physical pain associated with that.
No, it's not unusual at all.
And as a form of self-medicating, alcohol and pain medication can be used for that.
Well, it can be misused for that.
Okay. But it's something that people can use to try to deal with the physical pain that's associated with their mental health or their mental pain.
Yes,
And during the months leading up, the weeks leading up to January 27th, in December especially, she's not even getting out of bed except for going to the doctor.
as far as I know, that is correct.
You would agree that she was under the influence of extreme mental and emotional disturbance at the time of the shootings. That's your opinion.
That is.
When you were talking to Ms. Schenecker about the events leading up to the shooting of the children, she expressed to you this idea or thought that she had when she was passing the washing machine and saw Bo's uniforms that she needed to wash them.
Yes,
And when you were talking about taking into consideration, you placed a lot of weight on the journals in this case, the writings.
they were particularly important, as well as some other pieces of information that had more relevancy and pertinence to me.
Now, as far as the writings versus her statement to law enforcement, your opinion about the statement to law enforcement is at that time she's basically overdosing because of what you know from the Tampa General Hospital records.
Yes,
And with those toxic levels, you would take that into consideration as far as weighing the things that she was saying during the statement.
I would take that into consideration, but those things that she reported that are consistent with the facts of the case would hold weight, would have weight and significance to me. That would show me that she understands what she's reporting because it's accurate. But yes, overall, as I indicated in my report, and I think earlier today, there were times during that interview where she was impaired.
You indicate in your report that although some of these spontaneous utterances and statements she made to law enforcement during the interview can support legal sanity, they were at times incoherent and less reliable because they were made after she took an overdose of multiple substances and she was impaired.
Yes, but again, I clearly indicated in my report and in my deposition and here today that although the overall interview would be less reliable in someone who had overdosed and is soon thereafter being diagnosed with lithium toxicity and Coumadin poisoning, those things that she reported that were consistent with her journal, were consistent with what she talked about on the 12911 interview with the defense team, and with the initial admittance to Tampa General and the jail, those things that are consistent are reliable.
So if they're consistent, they're reliable, and if they're inconsistent, you don't consider them?
Well, it's not that I don't consider them, but the things that I can corroborate, those things that I can support by external evidence, then I have proof that there's some validity and there's some reliability to those statements. That doesn't mean I'm ignoring anything else. I mean, I didn't ignore, for example, that she asked, well, are my kids coming in later? I didn't ignore that. I have an explanation for that.
Did you ignore the part where she said I should have paid attention to the squeaks in the chairs?
I do remember her saying something like that.
Did you ignore the part where she said, when he asked her, are your children dead, she says, I don't know?
Well, she actually said, I think she said, I hope so.
No. I believe what she says is, I don't know, and then they ask her something further, and then she says, I hope so.
Okay.
Objection form. As to the form of the question, sustain. Your next question comes.
Are those things you took into consideration?
Very much so.
And you would agree that the questioning for someone who is severely depressed, who you state is under the influence of extreme mental and emotional disturbance, is being questioned by 2 seasoned homicide detectives?
You're asking me if I would...
You agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And the questions that they're asking her are leading questions.
Some of them were leading questions, yes. It wasn't what we would call completely open-ended, like, tell me what happened. Although some of the questions were like that. There were some that were more close-ended questions.
It's not a clinical interview.
Well, I wouldn't expect detectives to conduct a clinical interview.
Okay. It's an interrogation.
They have to answer that. I mean, it was,
When you take into account the journal and the writings, when you were talking about Ms. Schenecker's motivation or her anger towards Parker Schenecker or towards the children, you would agree that when she's talking about Parker Schenecker in the journal, she states, Parker, you've been so good to us, and I've learned so much from you. I'm so sorry I've taken that away from you.
What page are you on, please?
I don't know what page it is.
At the bottom?
Yes.
Oh, it doesn't say on yours.
No, it's, you know what,
Just take me a second.
Please be specific.
I will, Your Honor.
Source of it for the record.
I will.
I see it.
Do you see which page I'm talking about?
Yeah, on my copy it says 243.
Okay. And for the record, it's states 33G. And some of the writing you would agree is illegible, or you can't read it.
I can read the writing, but some of the sentences are less than completely sensical.
Okay. And that's a constant throughout the writings that are in the notebook.
I wouldn't say it's a constant throughout. I would say that the first 4 pages of this, it is pretty consistent. And then on Monday, when she documents her thoughts, her feelings, what have you, on Monday, she says, she reread everything, and she doesn't even understand her own thoughts that she put to paper. She said, I sound stupid and uneducated. No wonder Calix calls me stupid. I think I was drunk when I was writing. Yes, I drank. I also used my leftover OxyContin.
And she, in fact, apologizes for the writings being incomprehensible.
In that particular part? I don't see that.
Going back to states 33G, she indicates that Parker's been good to her, or good to us, meaning her and the children.
Parker, you've been so good to us, and forward for our hours. I've learned so much from you. I'm so sorry I've taken that away from you, teaching them.
And then she's talking at that point in a positive manner towards Parker.
Well, I don't, yeah, I mean, there's something that she's saying positive, but she's also acknowledging that she has taken something away from him.
But as far as her feelings towards Parker, and they fluctuate throughout, but in that indication, she's talking about how good he is to them.
Yes.
And at times, she talks about, Parker, I did always love you and have always wanted the best for you. You're the best dad too. And that states 33F.
I don't see that.
I'll approach you with states 33F.
Okay.
The very bottom paragraph. She indicates that I did always love you and have always wanted the best for you. You're the best dad too.
Yes, that's part of a long...
It's at the end of the page.
It is.
Yes. So you would agree that there are times, like any marriage, she'll speak nicely about Parker, Schenecker, and then at times lovingly about Parker.
Well, I will acknowledge within that journal, as you have indicated, that there are some mixed feelings and some mixed writings, not only towards Parker, but also her children.
You were saying earlier that the Tampa General Hospital interview that was done with Dr. Solomon, I believe that your testimony was that that interview, when she's speaking, she's coherent.
Yeah, I would say in its totality that her responses are relevant, they're quite spontaneous,
Now,
and fairly coherent.
And at that time, she's in the hospital for the overdose.
Correct. This is very close in time to the alleged crimes.
You talked about in direct examination the molestation thought by Julie Schenecker came out of left field.
Yes.
You would agree that throughout her discussion with you and with other doctors, she reported being sexually abused before.
Yes.
And you would agree that it's not uncommon for people that were victims of sexual abuse to fear that for their children.
I wouldn't argue with that.
Okay.
I don't know how common it is, but I wouldn't argue with that.
So someone that has been sexually abused, you would agree that that is something that can potentially affect them for their entire life?
Yes.
And in fact, with Ms. Schenecker, it affects her to the point where she feels uncomfortable being around people, individuals that have beards, because it reminds her of the person that molested her when she was 6.
She did share that with me. I believe she said for many years. I don't know if that continued over the last several years, but yes, she had a very visceral reaction if she would see someone with a beard because of the neighborhood man who had molested her.
And you would agree that in the journal, talking about saving the children, although that's not something that is expressly written, that it wouldn't be unusual for her to feel protective of her children in regards to being potential victims of sexual abuse.
I'm a little bit confused by your incorporating in your question the journal, because I didn't see anywhere in the journal that she was concerned about that. Do you mean just in general?
In the journal, you would agree that when she indicates her reason for shooting her children was to save them.
Well, she indicates many things. She indicates that they may have inherited her DNA. She indicates that they may have bipolar disorder or could have bipolar disorder. She also indicates that, they were mouthy, sassy, nasty, bad attitudes.
But at the time that she's talking about saving her children, you'd agree she's talking about saving her children from developing bipolar illness or having a mother who's committed suicide.
Yes, that's another one that she indicated.
And you agree it's not written in there her concerns about the children being victims of being molested.
It's not written in there. It's not reported or written anywhere in the evidence close in time. I didn't see it even in the USF psych records, where if that was such a major concern, I would have expected to have seen that in therapy notes, and I didn't see it after the alleged crimes, soon after.
But you would agree someone that expresses to you that she's been sexually abused and still to this day has concerns or thoughts when someone has a beard that's around them, that could extend to protecting her children. That's not unreasonable. You would agree with that?
Well, I think it's speculation. I mean, she's never said that.
Well, but I'm asking your opinion. That's not unreasonable.
It's not unreasonable for any parent, especially if someone themselves have been molested, that they would be concerned and want to try to educate their children on the bad people in the world, including, pedophiles. Of course not. Wouldn't be unreasonable.
And when you were talking about your evaluation of the evidence, specifically the emails that were sent to Parker Schenecker on January 27, 2011, you talked about the response, "Get home soon, we're waiting for you."
Yes.
Okay. And you received more than just that email from that date on January 27, 2011.
I believe there was an email to her family from Ms. Schenecker at 8:54 p.m. on that date.
And there was also an email to Parker Schenecker on January 27, 2011, at 7:48, where she's forwarding, Calyx has all B's and A's, Bo has 2 C's, which will cross out a couple A's he has, but Tilla 3. There's some typos in it. But
Yes,
you
I
would
did.
agree that she's forwarded some Edline information about Calyx's grades and Bo's grades.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And that's around the same time frame as the Get Home Soon, We're Waiting for You.
I thought the Get Home Soon, We're Waiting for You was quite a bit later.
You wonder if I could, would looking at it refresh your recollection?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
wonder if I could approach?
Yes.
Let's see. Okay, you are correct. The first one was at 1948 about the grades. The second one was 1933 about Get Home Soon, We're Waiting for You.
And you derived from the email, Get Home Soon, We'll Be Waiting for You, that she wanted Parker Schenecker to come home and find the children.
That's very possible.
And that's something that you testified to.
Yes, what I thought about it most was since that was very likely after she had already killed the children, that it appeared hostile, angry to me.
You would agree that that's also consistent with her not realizing that the children are dead and continuing on in the same way that she always continues on with checking her email and checking the children's grades and forwarding that information to Parker Schenecker.
I can't agree with that because there's so much evidence that she clearly knew that they were dead.
You also received, as part of the documents in this case, a text message that was sent from Julie Schenecker to Lisa Prisco.
Yes.
Okay. And that text message was sent on...
Objection.
You can approach. You may continue.
Would it refresh your recollection as to the text message if I approach and show it to you?
Sure. Okay, I've read it.
This text message, along with the journal entries, let me show you the exact page. States 33I on the bottom, where Ms. Schenecker indicates, Thursday, I will send Lisa a letter. She'll be able to get in the house through the MB sliders. It's the last 4 lines.
Okay.
And I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 11. Were you provided the crime scene photos?
Yes.
Okay. You would agree that it's equally possible, based on that information, that Ms. Schenecker leaving the master bedroom sliders open and sending information to Lisa, that she wanted Lisa Prisco to be the one that would come into the home and find the children?
What's important in answering that question is that,
Well, if you could answer it first and then you can explain. All I'm asking, is that equally possible?
no, it's not equally possible. Let me
Okay.
explain why. It's possible, but it's not equally possible, because when she emailed, or texted rather, Lisa, it was after she had already taken massive drugs, medications. When she sent the email to Parker, that was before, according to her, she had not yet taken all of that medication. So it's much less reliable as a whole, what she is saying after she is already taken an overdose, a lot of medications, unless, like I said earlier, there's concrete evidence that supports that she exactly wanted Lisa to find her. Whether she wanted Lisa to find her or not, or whether she wanted Parker to find her or not, is so peripheral to my opinion. It's not that important to me.
You would agree that this writing in the journal that's in State's Exhibit 33I, before the writing start at the middle of the page, it says SUN, which would indicate Sunday.
That's what it says there.
So she's writing on Sunday about sending Lisa a letter on Thursday about going into the master bedroom sliders.
That's what she says here, yes.
If I could have one moment.
Yes.
Nothing further.
We're going to give the jury about a 10-minute comfort break. This will just be a get up and stretch break. You're reminded of my prior instructions. We'll let you step out for about 10 minutes.
All rise.